I never thought a simple refusal could cost me my job. That night, the management board invited everyone to a drinking party. It wasn't just about drinks, it was a test of loyalty. I said no, just that. The next morning, my manager called me in, his smile thin and cold. "We need to talk about your future here." My heart sank. I knew something was off, but didn't expect how quickly everything would change. Just like that, my ordinary life was about to unravel. By the way, before we dive in, tell me in the comments, ever seen someone get the revenge they really deserved? I read all of them. Hey, while you're here, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next. Let's continue. My name's Hannah. I'm 32 years old, working as a project manager at a mid-sized tech company in the city. I've always been the type who prefers to keep things professional, focused on work rather than socializing outside office hours. Honestly, after a long day, I just want to go home and unwind quietly. That night, when the management board sent out the message about the drinking party, I wasn't surprised. These things happen, especially in companies where team bonding is kind of an unspoken requirement. But it wasn't mandatory, or at least that's what I thought. Before that night, everything seemed normal. I had been at the company for about 5 years. I knew the rhythm of the workplace well, the deadlines, the personalities, the small, unwritten rules. My role was challenging but rewarding. I liked being the one who organized projects, coordinated between teams, and kept everything on track. It wasn't a glamorous job, but it was mine, and I took pride in doing it well. Still, something had felt off in the weeks leading up to that evening. I had noticed subtle shifts, though at the time I brushed them off as my imagination or just work stress. My manager, Mr. Kwan, who was usually cordial, had grown distant. He started avoiding eye contact in meetings, and his emails became terse, almost clipped. One day, I caught him exchanging a quick, serious glance with the head of HR when I walked by. I wondered if I'd done something wrong, but nothing concrete came up. Then there were the casual remarks. At the monthly team meeting, after I politely declined to join the after-work drinks once or twice, a senior executive joked, "Hannah's too busy being the good girl, huh?" It was light, maybe even teasing, but the tone had an edge that made me uncomfortable. Was this a warning, a subtle pressure? Despite these signs, I stayed calm. I figured it was just office politics playing out quietly in the background. I didn't want to get caught up in drama. I focused on my tasks, checking project timelines, sending out weekly updates, coordinating with the development team. I worked late one night, reviewing a presentation for a major client pitch. My phone buzzed with a message from my sister. "How's work? Still skipping the fun stuff with the bosses?" I smiled but didn't reply immediately. I wasn't sure how to explain this growing unease. When the invitation for the drinking party came, I felt that familiar tug. Should I go? Could I afford to skip? I weighed it silently in my mind while finishing a report. The answer was simple: no, it wasn't about defiance. I just didn't want to. I'd rather get a good night's sleep than force down drinks. I didn't want or pretend to enjoy conversations that felt forced and superficial. I replied politely, "Thank you, but I won't be able to join this time." That was when the quiet preparation began, though I didn't know it yet. After sending that message, I noticed a subtle shift in how I was treated. Meetings were scheduled without me. Emails that once included me suddenly left me out. My ideas, which had been welcomed before, were met with silence or vague nods. It felt like I was shrinking in my own workplace, slowly being edged out. At home, I kept a journal, something I'd started a few years earlier to clear my head. I began jotting down details, who said what when, the tone of conversations. It was my way of making sense of what was happening, of gathering the puzzle pieces without even realizing I was preparing for something bigger. I talked to close friends carefully, not wanting to seem paranoid. "Maybe they're just having a rough patch," one said. "Maybe it's temporary." But deep down, I felt the weight of those missing invitations and cold silences. One evening, as I was packing up my laptop, my colleague Yi came over. "You all right?" he asked quietly. I nodded, forcing a smile. He hesitated, then said, "You know, it's not just you. The board's been pushing hard lately. Some people think the drinking parties are kind of mandatory." His eyes flicked around, wary. That confirmed it. It wasn't just me being overly sensitive, there was a culture of exclusion and I was on the outside. But still, I didn't react outwardly. I kept my head down, delivered my projects on time, and stayed professional. No confrontations, no emotional outbursts. I knew I had to be careful. Reacting too soon might give them the excuse they were looking for. Instead, I started preparing quietly. I backed up important work files, documented my contributions, and kept copies of emails and messages that could later prove what was happening. I didn't know what I'd do with this information yet, but I trusted my gut that it might be needed someday. This silent preparation was a comfort. It gave me a sense of control in a situation where I was otherwise powerless. I wasn't alone, either. I remembered other stories I'd heard of people sidelined for small reasons, often without warning. But what made this different was the creeping realization that the drinking party wasn't just a social event, it was a gatekeeper for belonging, a test I had failed. So every morning I walked into the office with a quiet resolve. I'd lost the warmth of camaraderie, yes, but I wasn't going to lose my dignity or my future without a fight. The question was, when would the fight begin? The morning after the party, everything changed. I was at my desk trying to focus on a project report when my phone buzzed. It was a message from HR, "Please come to the office for a quick meeting." My heart skipped a beat. A quick meeting at HR was never quick or easy. I tried to steady my breathing. Maybe it's just routine, I told myself, maybe something minor. But deep down, I knew. The conference room felt colder than usual when I walked in. Mr. Kwon was already there, sitting with a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. Across from him sat Miss Lee, the HR manager, her expression unreadable. I took a seat, clutching my folder a little too tightly. "Kana," Mr. Kwon started, using the formal version of my name, "we appreciate the work you've done here. Your projects have been solid, no doubt about that." He spoke carefully, like someone delivering bad news with rehearsed gentleness. "But," Miss Lee interrupted softly, "the management board has decided to make some organizational changes." I blinked, trying to follow the script in my head. Organizational changes? That usually meant layoffs or reshuffling. Mr. Kwon's eyes locked on mine. "Effective immediately, your position is terminated." The room seemed to shrink. I heard my own voice, calm but firm. "Because I didn't join the drinking party." He hesitated, then smiled thinly. "That's not the official reason, it's about fit and team dynamics." Team dynamics, a euphemism so tired it almost made me laugh. I shook my head slowly. "So it's about drinking together after work." Miss Lee cleared her throat. "We believe this decision is in the best interest of the company." I looked around the room, searching for any hint of sympathy. There was none. After they handed me the termination letter, I stood up quietly, folding the papers carefully. I said nothing more. My mind was spinning, but my voice stayed steady. Walking out of that building, I felt the eyes of colleagues on me, some sympathetic, some indifferent, and others with a shade of relief. It hit me how isolated I'd become. Later, in the silence of my apartment, I replayed the scene over and over. Why had I been singled out? Was it really just about a drinking party? I thought about the small signs, the cold glances, the exclusion. It was all connected. This wasn't about work performance, it was about conformity. And I had refused to conform. Yet despite the shock, there was no breakdown, no tears. Just a quiet, simmering determination. "Okay," I whispered to myself, "if this is how it's going to be, I'll find another way." The next days were a blur of calls, job searches, and awkward conversations with former colleagues. But beneath it all, I began gathering my thoughts, quietly planning. What they didn't realize was that I wasn't disappearing, I was preparing to come back stronger. After that meeting, after the official cut, life felt like a strange kind of silence had settled around me. But in that quiet, I was moving faster than ever before, just beneath the surface, collecting pieces of a puzzle I hadn't fully understood yet. I spent my mornings scanning emails and messages from my last months at the company. I saved everything: project files, client communications, approvals. These weren't just reminders of work well done, they were proof, evidence of my contributions. If anyone tried to claim I was underperforming or not a team player, I had the facts ready. Numbers, dates, emails. I'd never been the type to think like this before, but now it felt necessary. One afternoon, I met with Yi, the colleague who had quietly warned me about the drinking party culture. We chose a small cafe away from the office buzz, a place where I could speak freely without fearing eavesdropping. I showed him some of the documents I had gathered. "See this?" I said, pointing at an email thread between me and a major client. "This is from the week before the party invite. Look at the tone, the clients praising the work, and here my manager's forwarding it with a note saying, 'Well done.'" Yi nodded, his eyes serious. "It's clear you were doing great work," he said. "If they want to say you're a bad fit, they're lying." We talked about how to use this information, not just to defend myself but to regain control of the narrative. Companies hate scandals, Yi said. If you have proof they pushed you out unfairly, that's powerful. I knew he was right, but it wasn't just about winning a battle. It was about showing I wasn't broken by their silence or exclusion. Beyond gathering evidence, I also started researching. I wanted to understand the bigger picture, the company's structure, the shareholders, any hints of instability or changes coming. I signed up for industry newsletters, read financial reports, and even tracked job postings for leadership roles. The more I learned, the clearer it became that my former company was at a crossroads, maybe more vulnerable than anyone realized. In the evenings, I drafted emails and proposals for consulting gigs. I updated my LinkedIn, reached out to old contacts, and even asked a few friends in other industries for advice. Every message I sent was deliberate and measured. I didn't want to rush into anything. This time I was going to be strategic. One night I sat by the window, the city lights flickering softly in the distance. I thought about how strange it was that something as trivial as refusing a drinking party could spiral into losing my job. But I also felt a strange clarity. This wasn't just an end, it was the start of something new. The plan began to take shape in my mind. Step 1, build a reputation outside that toxic environment. Step 2, connect with companies that valued real skills, not forced socializing. Step 3, keep an eye on my former workplace, know when the moment to act would come. I kept my emotions in check, even on days when frustration crept in. Instead, I reminded myself of what I wanted: respect, fairness, and a chance to prove my worth on my terms. Over time, I started getting responses. A small startup asked if I could help with their project timelines. A mid-sized foreign corporation reached out, interested in someone with experience in tech project management and international negotiations. When the foreign company called me for a formal interview, I was ready. I had rehearsed answers, but more importantly, I had confidence. This wasn't just about a new job, it was about reclaiming my future. As I walked into that interview room, I thought about the drinking party, the cold smiles, the abrupt dismissal. I didn't feel anger anymore. I felt calm, prepared, and in control. I knew then that this chapter wasn't over. It was just beginning. The day finally came when I faced them again, but not as the employee they pushed out. This time, I walked into a glass-walled conference room as a consultant for a foreign corporation that had just approached me, seeking my expertise for a very sensitive task: negotiating a potential takeover of my former company. I remember standing outside the building, the weight of everything flooding back. That familiar lobby, the polished floors, the distant hum of office chatter, but the power had shifted. I was no longer on the outside looking in, I was about to step into their world on my own terms. Inside, the room was tense but controlled. The management board from my old company sat at the far end, their faces unreadable. I noticed Mr. Kwon's gaze briefly flicker to me, sharp but guarded. I met it calmly, holding their silence like a shield. The meeting began with formal introductions. My client's CEO spoke first, outlining the scope and goals of the negotiation. I listened carefully, but my attention kept drifting back to the people across the table. Faces I'd seen every day now watching me with a mix of suspicion and something else. Was it regret? Then it was my turn. "I'm here to find common ground," I said steadily, voice clear, "and to ensure the transition benefits all parties involved." A board member, Mr. Park, leaned forward, a smirk barely concealed. "Funny how you come back with such confidence," he said. "Not long ago, you were out the door for refusing a simple invitation." I smiled gently, letting the weight of those words hang in the air. "Yes," I replied, "I was out the door. But sometimes doors close to push you toward something better." The room fell quiet, the tension thick. Negotiations began, and it became clear that I wasn't just there as a middleman. I knew the company inside out. I anticipated their concerns, preempted objections, and presented solutions that aligned with my client's goals, but also respected my former colleagues' interests. At one point, Mr. Kwon challenged me. "You know the company's culture better than anyone. Do you really think this takeover is in the best interest of the employees?" I met his gaze directly. Culture isn't just about after-hours drinks or forced social events. It's about respect, collaboration, and trust. Those are the values that will carry any company forward. There was a flicker of surprise in his eyes, maybe even a hint of respect. The discussion turned tough at times. Terms were debated, numbers scrutinized, and strategies questioned. But through it all, I stayed calm. I wasn't here to burn bridges, I was here to build a new path. Between sessions, I found moments to observe quietly. The subtle exchanges, the uneasy glances. I saw cracks in their confidence, signs that the company wasn't as stable as they projected. That knowledge gave me leverage, not just in negotiation, but in reclaiming my place in the story. Then came the unexpected twist. A late afternoon call from my client's CEO informed me of a new piece of information, a hidden financial risk buried deep in my former company's accounts, overlooked by their own auditors. It was a game changer. I shared this quietly with the board, watching their composed masks slip. Mr. Park's smirk vanished, replaced by a tight jaw. "That's concerning," he admitted. "Yes," I said, "and it's precisely why this deal needs careful handling. My goal is to protect everyone, but also to ensure accountability." That moment shifted the atmosphere. I wasn't just a former employee with a grudge. I was a professional armed with knowledge and strategy, steering the conversation. By the end of the day, the tone had changed. There was still negotiation ahead, but a new respect had formed. They had underestimated me once, but now they couldn't ignore what I brought to the table. As I left the building, I felt a quiet satisfaction, not from triumph over others, but from knowing I'd stayed true to myself. I hadn't let bitterness cloud my judgment. Instead, I used everything I'd learned, the pain, the exclusion, the preparation, to become stronger. That day, the story wasn't just about a takeover. It was about resilience, strategy, and the power of turning setbacks into new beginnings. After that intense day of negotiation, the work was far from over. But something had shifted, not just in the room with the management board, but inside me. I'd gone from feeling powerless to holding a position of quiet authority. It was an odd feeling, one I wasn't used to but welcomed. In the weeks that followed, I moved carefully, implementing the plan we'd crafted with the foreign corporation. I was no longer just a consultant offering advice. I was the bridge between two worlds, my former company's past and a future neither they nor I could ignore. Each morning, I'd review reports, financial data, and legal documents that painted a clearer picture of where the company stood. I coordinated meetings, exchanged emails, and prepared detailed briefs for my client, always making sure every step was deliberate and precise. Sometimes, late at night, I'd find myself rereading old emails or financial statements, piecing together small details that might have been missed before. I wasn't just observing the company, I was studying it, learning its weaknesses and strengths like someone preparing to guide a ship through a storm. There were moments when the old frustration tried to creep back in. When I walked past the office elevator or caught a familiar face avoiding my gaze, I felt that pang of exclusion all over again. But I caught myself before it took hold. Instead, I reminded myself why I was here: to create change, not chaos. The people who shut me out didn't define me anymore. One day, during a progress update call with the foreign CEO, I heard something that felt like a small victory. "We're seeing positive shifts," she said. "Employees who were hesitant are starting to engage more, the board's openness is improving, your insights are making a difference." I smiled to myself. It wasn't just about numbers or contracts, it was about people. Slowly, the company culture was beginning to loosen its rigid hold. I began hearing about small changes. More open communication, fewer forced social gatherings, teams collaborating with less tension. At the office, though, my presence wasn't always welcomed warmly. A few of my former colleagues avoided eye contact or kept conversations strictly professional. Some whispered behind closed doors, but others reached out, some quietly, others more openly. One afternoon, I bumped into Mina, a junior project coordinator who'd always admired my work. She hesitated, then said, "Hannah, I just wanted to say thank you for not giving up. You've given a lot of us hope." Her words struck me deeply. I realized then that my fight wasn't just personal, it resonated with others who had felt overlooked or undervalued. That small moment reminded me why I'd stayed patient and kept planning. I wasn't just making a comeback for myself, I was paving the way for change within that environment. My mindset began to shift too. I was no longer just the person who got pushed out for not fitting in at a party. I was someone who had reclaimed her space, rebuilt her career, and was helping to shape a new chapter for a company that once shut its doors on me. Financially, things improved as well. The consulting fees allowed me to regain stability and independence, a freedom I hadn't fully appreciated before. But more than money, it was the restoration of confidence that mattered most. I started setting new goals for myself, planning projects beyond the takeover, even considering collaborations outside my usual circle. One evening, after a long day of calls and planning, I sat at my desk and reflected. I thought about the drinking party, the cold exclusion, the shock of losing my job. I didn't feel bitterness anymore, just a calm satisfaction. I had turned their rejection into a new opportunity. The company was changing, the people around me were adapting, and I was growing stronger. I had learned that sometimes, strength isn't about confrontation but about quiet persistence and strategic patience. And I was ready for whatever came next. As the takeover negotiations progressed, the consequences of what had started with that one drinking party began to ripple outward, affecting everyone involved, but especially those who had once seemed so certain of their power. The management board at my former company faced increasing pressure. Internally, cracks appeared. Rumors of financial instability spread, whispered conversations in corridors became more frequent, and the once confident tone of the executives shifted. I heard through my contacts that some members of the board were quietly meeting with legal advisors, trying to find ways to delay or even derail the deal. I wasn't surprised. I'd watched how people who feel threatened try to cling to control. But I knew their resistance was futile, not just because of the solid evidence and strategy we'd gathered, but because the company itself needed change. Meanwhile, my role as consultant became more prominent. The foreign corporation trusted my insights, my understanding of the company's inner workings, and my ability to navigate sensitive conversations. I started participating in strategic sessions, advising on restructuring plans, and even helping draft communication strategies for the employees. One day, I received an unexpected message from Mr. Kwon. It was brief. Just a simple, "Can we talk?" Part of me wanted to ignore it, another part was curious. After everything, what could he want? We met in a quiet cafe away from prying eyes. He looked older somehow, the usual confidence replaced by something more reflective. "Hana," he began hesitantly, "I wanted to apologize for how things ended, for not standing up when I should have." I studied his face carefully. Was this genuine or just damage control? "I appreciate that," I said calmly. "But this isn't about the past anymore, it's about what comes next." He nodded, a flicker of relief crossing his features. "I can see you've grown stronger. Smarter, you've made a real difference." That moment was a turning point, not a full reconciliation, but a step toward closure. Back at the company, the impact of the takeover started showing in tangible ways. Policies changed, more voices were heard in meetings, and the toxic culture that once revolved around forced socializing began to dissolve. Employees who had felt sidelined started taking more active roles. There was cautious optimism in the air. Financially, the company stabilized. The hidden risks we uncovered were addressed, and a clearer path forward was mapped out. My client's investment helped inject new energy and ideas into the business. For me personally, this chapter marked a profound transformation. I wasn't just the person who'd been unfairly pushed out. I was now someone who had reclaimed her narrative, earned respect, and helped bring about meaningful change. The experience strengthened my confidence and reshaped my vision for my career. I began receiving invitations to speak at industry events, share my story, and consult for other companies facing similar challenges. But beyond career milestones, the most important change was in how I saw myself. I learned that resilience wasn't just about bouncing back, it was about growing through adversity, finding new purpose, and leading with integrity. Relationships with some former colleagues shifted too. Some apologized quietly, others stayed distant. I accepted both as part of the journey. Not everyone would change, but I no longer needed everyone's approval. Looking back, I realized that being excluded from that party, pushed out for refusing to conform, was painful. But it was also the catalyst that pushed me to become who I was meant to be. The day I officially closed my consulting contract with the foreign corporation, I felt a quiet sense of completion settle over me. The takeover was finalized, the company was on a new path, and I had fully stepped out of the shadow of my past. Walking away from that last meeting, I didn't feel bitterness or regret anymore. Instead, I carried a calm confidence, knowing I had turned what once felt like a devastating setback into an opportunity for growth and transformation. I often think back to that night when I declined the drinking party invitation. It seemed like such a small, almost insignificant decision at the time, but it changed everything. Losing my job over something so trivial felt unfair, even cruel. But it forced me to step back and reassess what mattered most: my values, my self-worth, and the kind of life and career I truly wanted to build. Now I live and work on my own terms. I consult for companies that prioritize professionalism, respect, and genuine collaboration over forced social rituals or toxic cultures. I choose projects that challenge me, environments where I'm judged by the quality of my work, not my willingness to conform to outdated expectations or social tests. Sometimes friends ask me how I stayed so calm through it all, how I didn't let anger consume me or make me bitter. The truth is, I didn't always know what I was doing. Some days were hard. But I learned that resilience isn't about never feeling hurt or angry. It's about choosing to move forward anyway, with intention and grace, even when the path is unclear. I've also learned the immense power of quiet strength. You don't always have to fight loudly to be heard. Sometimes, careful preparation, patience, and thoughtful strategy can bring about change where loud confrontation cannot. My relationships changed too. I grew closer to those who supported me quietly through it all and became more selective about who I trust and allow into my life. That was a lesson in itself, understanding that not everyone deserves a place in your story, especially when your story is still unfolding. Looking ahead, I feel excited and open to new possibilities. I'm currently considering a consulting project with a European tech firm, and I'm exploring ways to mentor young professionals facing similar challenges. Helping others realize that setbacks can be stepping stones if you're willing to learn, adapt, and stay true to yourself, that feels like a meaningful way to give back. Most of all, I want people to know this. Sometimes, what feels like an ending is really just the beginning. If you hold on to your values and keep moving forward, even the hardest experiences can lead to unexpected opportunities and strengths you never imagined. So if you ever find yourself on the outside, pushed out or overlooked for reasons that don't make sense, remember you have the power to rewrite your story. The road won't always be easy, and sometimes the nights will feel long. But every closed door is simply making way for the one you're truly meant to open. And that door, it might lead to a future you hadn't dared to dream before.